To Cassandra Austen, Sunday the 24th of January, 1813, Chawton. My dear Cassandra, this is exactly the weather we could wish for, if you are but well enough to enjoy it. I shall be glad to hear you are not confined to the house by an increase of cold. Mr. Digweed has used us basely. Handsome is as handsome does. He is therefore a very ill-looking man. I hope you have sent off a letter to me by this day's post, unless you attempted to wait till tomorrow by one of Mr. Chute's franks. We have had no letter since you went away, and no visitor, except Miss Ben, who dined with us on Friday. But we have received the half of an excellent Stilton cheese, we presume from Henry. My mother is very well, and finds great amusement in the glove knitting. When this pair is finished, she means to knit another, and at present wants no other work. We quite run over with books. She has got Sir John Carr's Travels in Spain from Miss B, and I am reading A Society Octavo, an essay on the military police and institutions of the British Empire by Captain Pasley of the Engineers, a book which I protested against at first, but which upon trial I find delightfully written and highly entertaining. I am as much in love with the author as I ever was with Clarkson or Buchanan, or even the two Mr. Smiths of the city. The first soldier I ever sighed for. But he does write with extraordinary force and spirit. Yesterday, moreover, brought us Mrs. Grant's letters, with Mr. White's compliments. But I have disposed of them, compliments and all, for the first fortnight to Miss Papillon. And among so many readers or retainers of books as we have in Chawton, I dare say there will be no difficulty in getting rid of them for another fortnight, if necessary. I learn from Sir J. Carr that there is no government house at Gibraltar. I must alter it to the Commissioners. Our party on Wednesday was not unagreeable, though as usual we wanted a better master of house, one less anxious and fidgety and more conversable. In consequence of a civil note that morning from Mrs. Clement, I went with her and her husband in their tax cart. Civility on both sides. I would rather have walked, and no doubt they must have wished I had. I ran home with my own dear Thomas at night in great luxury. Thomas was very useful. We were 11 altogether, as you will find on computation, adding Miss Ben and two strange young gentlemen, a Mr. Twyford, curate of Great Waldham, who is living in Alton, and his friend Mr. Wilkes. I do not know that Mr. T is anything except very dark complexioned, but Mr. Waldham was a useful addition, being an easy, talking, pleasantish young man, a very young man, hardly 20 perhaps. He is of St. John's, Cambridge, and spoke very highly of H. Walter as a scholar. He said he was considered as the best classic in the university. How such a report would have pleased my father. I could see nothing very promising between Mr. P. and Miss P.T. She placed herself on one side of him at first, but Miss Ben obliged her to move up higher, and she had an empty plate, and even asked him to give her some mutton without being attended to for some time. There might be design in this, to be sure, on his side. He might think an empty stomach the most favourable for love. Upon Mrs. Digweed's mentioning that she had sent the rejected addresses to Mr. Hinton, I began talking to her a little about them, and expressed my hope of their having amused her. Her answer was, "Oh dear, yes, very much, very droll indeed, the opening of the house and the striking up of the fiddles." What she meant, poor woman, who shall say? I sought no farther. The Papillons have now got the book, and like it very much. Their niece Eleanor has recommended it most warmly to them. She looks like a rejected addresser. As soon as a whist party was formed and a round table threatened, I made my mother an excuse and came away, leaving just as many for their round table as there were at Mrs. Grant's. I wish they might be as agreeable a set. It was past 10 when I got home, so I was not ashamed of my dutiful delicacy. The Coltards were talked of, you may be sure. No end of them. Miss Terry had heard they were going to rent Mr. Bramston's house at Oakley, and Mrs. Clement that they were going to live at Streatham. Mrs. Digweed and I agreed that the house at Oakley could not possibly be large enough for them, and now we find they have really taken it. Mr. Gauntlet is thought very agreeable, and there are no children at all. The Miss Sibleys want to establish a book society in their side of the country like ours. What can be a stronger proof of that superiority in ours over the Steventon and Manydown Society, which I have always foreseen and felt? No emulation of the kind was ever inspired by their proceedings. No such wish of the Miss Sibleys was ever heard in the course of the many years of that society's existence. And what are their Biglands and their Barrows, their Macartneys and Mackenzies, to Captain Pasley's essay on the military police of the British Empire and the rejected addresses? I have walked once to Alton, and yesterday Miss Papillon and I walked together to call on the Garnets. She invited herself very pleasantly to be my companion when I went to propose to her the indulgence of accommodating us about the letters from the mountains. I had a very agreeable walk. If she had not, more shame for her, for I was quite as entertaining as she was. Dame G is pretty well, and we found her surrounded by her well-behaved, healthy, large-eyed children. I took her an old shift and promised her a set of our linen, and my companion left some of her bank stock with her. Tuesday has done its duty, and I've had the pleasure of reading a very comfortable letter. It contains so much that I feel obliged to write down the whole of this page, and perhaps something in a cover. When my parcel is finished, I shall walk with it to Alton. I believe Miss Ben will go with me. She spent yesterday evening with us. As I know Mary is interested in her not being neglected by her neighbours, pray tell her that Miss B dined last Wednesday at Mr. Papillon's, on Thursday with Captain and Mrs. Clement, Friday here, Saturday with Mrs. Digweed, and Sunday with the Papillons again. I had fancied that Martha would be at Barton from last Saturday, but am pleased to be mistaken. I hope she is now quite well. Tell her that I hunt away the rogues every night from under her bed. They feel the difference of her being gone. Miss Ben wore her new shawl last night, sat in it the whole evening and seemed to enjoy it very much. A very sloppy lane last Friday. What an odd sort of country you must be in. I cannot at all understand it. It was just greasy here on Friday, in consequence of the little snow that had fallen in the night. Perhaps it was cold on Wednesday. Yes, I believe it certainly was, but nothing terrible. Upon the whole, the weather, for winter weather, is delightful. The walking excellent. I cannot imagine what sort of a place Steventon can be. My mother sends her love to Mary, with thanks for her kind intentions and inquiries as to the pork, and will prefer receiving her share from the 2 last pigs. She has great pleasure in sending her a pair of garters, and is very glad that she had them ready knit. Her letter to Anna is to be forwarded, if any opportunity offers, otherwise it may wait for her return. Mrs. Lee's letter came this morning. We are glad to hear anything so tolerable of Scarlett's. Poor Charles and his frigate. But there could be no chance of his having one, while it was thought such a certainty. I can hardly believe Brother Michael's news. We have no such idea in Chawton, at least. Mrs. Bramston is the sort of woman I detest. Mr. Cottrell is worth 10 of her. It is better to be given the lie direct than to excite no interest.